Across the long span of history, certain moments recorded in ancient texts rise above their setting and speak with a resonance that does not fade. Isaiah's vision in the Jerusalem temple is one of those moments. It is described briefly, with little ornamentation, yet across thousands of years it has continued to provoke scholars, theologians, and historians. For many, it is the most vivid description of the divine realm ever reported by a prophet of Israel. For others, it is a window into how ancient people understood kingship, holiness, and the fragile world they inhabited. Before examining the deeper layers of this vision, one must first appreciate the world in which Isaiah lived, for his encounter is inseparable from the anxieties, political shifts, and religious expectations of his time. The setting is the final year of King Uzziah, a monarch whose long reign had brought strength to Judah but ended in turmoil and disease. The political landscape around Isaiah was changing rapidly. Assyria, under ambitious rulers, was rising into an empire unmatched in its power, swallowing smaller states with ruthless efficiency. Neighboring nations struggled to maintain independence, forming temporary alliances that collapsed as quickly as they were made. Within Judah's borders, the death of Uzziah created uncertainty about the stability of the throne. Isaiah's audience knew well that the death of a king was not merely a change of leadership. It was a moment in which the balance of power, both earthly and spiritual, felt vulnerable. In the ancient Near East, kingship was understood as a divine institution, an earthly echo of a heavenly throne. Temples were not merely religious centers, but political heartlands, linking the fate of a nation to the God it served. This worldview shaped the way Isaiah's listeners would hear his testimony. For a prophet to claim that he had seen the divine throne was not simply to recount a mystical experience, but to speak into the very structure of Judah's social and political reality. The temple in Jerusalem, adorned with symbols rooted in centuries of tradition, would have been associated with both stability and fear, a place where the presence of the divine was believed to dwell, yet also a realm in which human impurity could not survive without consequence. Isaiah's narrative begins abruptly, as though he had no interest in preparing his audience for what followed. The simplicity of the statement contrasts with the magnitude of what he describes. He saw the Lord seated upon a throne, elevated beyond anything earthly, and surrounded by beings whose form and function defy simple explanation. In ancient depictions from Assyria and surrounding cultures, kings are shown seated on high thrones, with attendants surrounding them, each performing a role that symbolizes authority, protection, or ritual significance. Archaeologists have uncovered carvings where the throne is raised above all else, conveying unchallenged dominance. Isaiah's description echoes these motifs, but with a theological depth unique to Israel's tradition. The hem of the divine robe is described as filling the entire temple. Such language would not have sounded exaggerated to Isaiah's contemporaries. In ancient royal courts, garments were symbols of power. Long, ornate robes were reserved for rulers and high priests. To claim that the robe of the divine figure filled the whole temple would have conveyed overwhelming majesty, the kind of authority that could not be approached or questioned. This was not merely a king of Judah or even of the nations. It was the sovereign of all creation whose presence surpasses the boundaries of sacred architecture. The beings Isaiah calls seraphim stand above the throne, each described as possessing 6 wings. The term itself carries the sense of burning or fiery, a quality that appears in older Canaanite and Egyptian traditions where celestial beings radiate light or flame. Yet, Isaiah's description is unlike any other in the Hebrew Bible. These beings cover their faces and feet, gestures associated with reverence and humility in the presence of overwhelming holiness, their voices calling out declarations of divine holiness, would later form the foundation of liturgical traditions that shaped worship in both Judaism and early Christianity. The phrase they proclaim emphasizes not just holiness, but an intensity and purity beyond comparison, an expression that scholars link to ancient Hebrew literary forms used to denote the highest degree of an attribute. Isaiah's reaction to this vision is not triumph or elation, but dread. This response reflects an ancient belief shared across the region. To behold the divine directly was to risk destruction. Stories from earlier biblical traditions reinforce this idea, such as the fear at Sinai when the people trembled at the presence of the Lord, or the warnings given to individuals who approached the sacred without proper purification. In Isaiah's world, holiness was not an abstract moral category, but a force with tangible effects. To stand unprepared before the divine realm was to encounter danger as real as fire or storm. His confession, "I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell among a people of unclean lips," reveals how deeply purity laws and moral concerns shaped ancient Israel's understanding of the self. The lips symbolized speech, the medium through which prophets delivered messages. Impurity of speech suggested not merely ritual deficiency, but moral inadequacy. Isaiah recognized that he, like his nation, fell short of what was required to stand in the presence of absolute holiness. His fear was not misplaced. The thresholds trembled, and smoke filled the space, reminiscent of earlier accounts where divine presence manifested through cloud and fire. These elements were common indicators in Israel's traditions, reflecting both concealment and revelation. Into this moment of fear, change arrives not through Isaiah's own effort, but through one of the seraphim. The being takes a burning coal from the altar with tongs, an act rich with symbolism. In the Jerusalem temple, coals played a crucial role in sacrificial rituals and purification rites. They were associated with atonement, cleansing, and the mediation between human impurity and divine holiness. That a seraph applies a glowing coal directly to Isaiah's mouth conveys a profound theological statement. Purity can be bestowed, not achieved. Holiness, though dangerous, is not solely destructive. It has the power to transform what it touches. The declaration that Isaiah's guilt is removed and his sin atoned for marks a turning point in the encounter. In the ancient Near Eastern world, kings often appointed emissaries after ritual acts that signified readiness or sanctification. Isaiah's purification prepares him for a role that will extend beyond the temple itself. The divine voice that follows, asking whom to send, resonates with themes found in other ancient texts where heavenly beings deliberate over events on earth. The notion of a divine council was familiar in Israel's thought, appearing in the stories of Job and in older psalmic traditions. It represents a world where human affairs are not isolated, but observed and influenced by a higher order. Isaiah responds without hesitation, a striking contrast to his earlier fear. The transformation of a reluctant, unworthy man into one willing to carry a difficult message mirrors a pattern found in the call narratives of several prophets. Yet Isaiah's task is unlike many others, for he is not sent to proclaim comfort, but to deliver words that will be resisted, misunderstood, and even rejected. These themes become more pronounced in later portions of his book, but their foundation is laid in this initial encounter. His readiness marks the beginning of a ministry that will span reigns, crises, and shifting alliances. While the focus of this opening exploration lies on the historical and cultural dimensions surrounding Isaiah's vision, its depth stems from how these elements intertwine. The political uncertainty of Judah, the established imagery of divine kingship, the ancient understanding of purity, and the belief in heavenly assemblies all contribute to an environment in which his experience becomes not merely a private revelation, but a message rooted in his world. This vision stands as a bridge between earthly instability and transcendent authority, shaping Isaiah's mission and the theological imagination of later generations. The throne room vision would continue to echo through centuries of interpretation. Early Jewish literature, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls and later mystical writings, reflects on similar scenes of heavenly worship and fiery attendance. Early Christian thinkers also drew heavily from this passage, connecting its imagery to themes of divine sovereignty and prophetic calling. Archaeologists and historians today approach the text not only as a religious statement, but as evidence of how ancient Israel understood its place within a much larger cultural and political landscape. Isaiah's world was changing, and his vision unfolded at the threshold of that change. It revealed a realm that both transcended earthly power and spoke into it. The holy presence he encountered was neither distant nor indifferent. It was a force that confronted impurity, transformed the willing, and commissioned them for purposes that extended far beyond their expectations. The atmosphere of this ancient encounter remains charged with meaning, offering insight into a people who believed that the divine was not confined to the heavens, but broke into history at decisive moments. Through Isaiah's experience, the ancient world becomes vivid again, illuminated by the interplay of fear, holiness, and calling that defined one of the most extraordinary visions recorded in Scripture. The grandeur of Isaiah's vision cannot be separated from the temple in which it occurred, for the physical structure itself played a role in shaping how ancient people understood divine encounters. The Jerusalem temple was not merely a building of stone and cedar. It was a carefully designed symbol of cosmic order. Its layout, rituals, and sacred objects reflected centuries of tradition that stretched back to the wilderness tabernacle, and further still into older Near Eastern conceptions of sacred space. To understand what Isaiah witnessed, one must enter the world of a temple that served as a meeting point between heaven and earth, a place where divine holiness was believed to rest with unmatched intensity. The first temple, constructed under Solomon, had stood for nearly 2 centuries by the time Isaiah entered its courts. Its architecture was rooted in patterns known across the region, where temples served as homes for the gods, administrative centers, and repositories of wealth. Archaeological findings from cities such as Ain Dara and Tel Tainat reveal structures with proportions strikingly similar to the biblical descriptions of Solomon's temple. These parallels suggest that Isaiah's world was one in which sacred architecture was understood through a shared cultural language. The massive entrance pillars, the inner sanctum, the golden furnishings, and the carefully maintained altar were not unique in form, but they were unique in meaning. For Israel, there was one God, and this temple represented the place where his presence dwelled in a special and terrifying way. The temple's inner sanctuary, where Isaiah perceived the divine throne, was a restricted space. Only the high priest could enter its deepest chamber, and only on a single day of the year. Yet, the biblical prophets often describe visions that take place within or beyond this sacred area, indicating that prophetic experience transcended normal ritual boundaries. Isaiah's contemporaries would not have understood his vision as a physical intrusion, but as an opening of reality, a moment in which the veil between the earthly sanctuary and the heavenly realm was drawn aside. In ancient thought, sacred space was fluid, capable of reflecting or connecting with the unseen world beyond it. Thus, what Isaiah saw was not a contradiction of temple regulations, but a revelation of the spiritual truth those regulations symbolized. The smoke that filled the temple, as Isaiah described, would have resonated with anyone familiar with daily rituals. Priests burned incense each morning and evening, symbolizing both prayer and divine presence. But the smoke in Isaiah's account behaves differently. It is not controlled or directed by human hands. It expands to fill the space in a manner reminiscent of earlier narratives, where divine presence was marked by overwhelming cloud. The pillars shake, conveying a force that cannot be contained. Such imagery parallels accounts from other ancient cultures, where appearances of the divine unsettle the structures around them. In Babylonian and Assyrian texts, the arrival of a deity is often accompanied by trembling earth or consuming fire. The temple itself becomes a stage for a cosmic encounter, reminding Isaiah and his audience that even the most solid places are fragile before the presence of holiness. The seraphim play a crucial role in this sacred drama. These beings, described with only a few words, have sparked centuries of debate among scholars. Their association with fire evokes multiple ancient traditions. In Egyptian iconography, winged cobra-like beings served as protectors of sacred spaces, breathing fire against intruders. In Canaanite texts, divine messengers sometimes appear in radiant or flame-like forms. Yet the seraphim in Isaiah's vision do not attack. They worship, proclaiming the holiness of the one who sits enthroned. Their 6 wings convey movement, reverence, and concealment, behaviors rooted in the ancient understanding that even divine beings veil themselves before the greater holiness of the supreme deity. Their proclamation forms one of the most recognizable lines in biblical literature. The threefold declaration of holiness expresses completeness and absolute purity. This emphasis on holiness, rather than power or victory, differentiates Isaiah's vision from many other ancient enthronement scenes. In Assyrian palace inscriptions, kings are praised for might and conquest, their thrones surrounded by imagery of domination. Isaiah's description, however, elevates holiness as the defining attribute of the divine character. This concept shaped later Jewish and Christian worship, appearing in prayers and hymns that echo the seraphim's words, preserving their ancient proclamation across millennia. Isaiah's sense of unworthiness reflects a deep-rooted cultural belief about encounters with the sacred. The idea that impurity could be dangerous in the presence of a deity is attested in multiple ancient traditions. In Israel's own texts, priests were required to observe strict purity laws before approaching the altar. Violations could result in death, as illustrated in earlier narratives involving unauthorized offerings. Isaiah's confession reveals that he understood these realities not as abstract rules but as personal danger. The holiness he witnessed was not gentle or distant. It confronted him directly, exposing his own moral and ritual insufficiency. Purity in Isaiah's world involved more than ritual actions. It encompassed speech, ethics, and fidelity to the covenant. Lips represented communication, the medium through which truth or falsehood, blessing or corruption entered the community. A prophet whose lips were unclean would be unable to speak for God. Isaiah's admission that he lived among a people with the same problem highlights a national concern. The community had drifted from its calling, compromising the purity required to maintain its special relationship with the divine. His fear that he would perish reflects the belief that holiness is not merely a quality, but a force, one that destroys impurity, not out of malice, but out of its own nature. The turning point occurs when one seraph approaches Isaiah with a burning coal taken from the altar. The altar was the heart of temple worship, the place where sacrifices were offered and where atonement rituals occurred. Coals from the altar were considered holy, set apart for sacred purposes. By touching the coal to Isaiah's lips, the seraph performs an act that blends symbolism and theology. Fire in the ancient world could purify or destroy. Here, it purifies, suggesting that divine holiness has the capacity not only to reveal impurity, but to remove it. This act is consistent with the theology expressed in other biblical passages where God initiates reconciliation. It also aligns with later priestly traditions where purification allows individuals to re-enter sacred space after defilement. Archaeologists have discovered altars in surrounding cultures that reflect similar concepts where fire symbolizes both threat and purification. The idea that a divine being would use a burning coal to cleanse a human aligns with a worldview in which holiness is active, transformative, and capable of restoring what impurity has damaged. The declaration that Isaiah's guilt has been removed provides the foundation for everything that follows in his ministry. In the ancient Near East, divine commissioning often followed a ritual act, marking an individual as chosen or empowered for a particular task. Royal inscriptions describe kings being purified or anointed before taking their place on the throne. Prophets likewise were expected to act as intermediaries between the divine and the people, requiring a moral and spiritual preparation that validated their message. Isaiah's purification establishes him as someone whose words will carry authority, not because of personal merit, but because the divine has equipped him for the role. The voice that speaks next represents a moment that combines heavenly majesty with intimate invitation. The question asking who will go as a messenger reflects a pattern known in ancient literature where divine assemblies deliberate over earthly matters. In Ugaritic texts, councils of gods address issues affecting the world, each member playing a role in the decision-making process. The Hebrew Bible contains similar scenes suggesting that Israel's understanding of the divine realm included the idea of heavenly deliberation. Isaiah's presence in such a moment indicates not only his purification, but his inclusion in the divine mission. His answer expresses readiness, resolve, and transformation. The fear that dominated him moments earlier is replaced by willingness, showing that purification has altered not only his status, but his inner posture. Ancient prophetic accounts often highlight this dynamic, where an individual encounters the divine, undergoes a transformative experience, and emerges with a clarity of purpose. Isaiah's response fits this pattern, yet his commissioning carries complexities unique to his time. He stands on the threshold of a turbulent period in Judah's history, one that will challenge the nation's faith, identity, and political alliances. The tension between divine holiness and human frailty becomes a central theme not only of Isaiah's ministry, but of the broader prophetic tradition. Holiness in the ancient world demanded separation, reverence, and obedience. Yet prophets were called to bring messages that confronted the people's failures to uphold these expectations. Isaiah's experience encapsulates this tension. He has seen the holiness that demands purity, yet he is sent to a people who struggle to maintain it. The ancient audience hearing this vision for the first time would have understood the gravity of his situation. A purified prophet sent to an impure nation symbolized both hope and judgment. Understanding this dynamic requires appreciating how ancient Israel viewed its covenant with the divine. The covenant was not a philosophical concept, but a lived relationship expressed through worship, law, and daily life. Violating covenant obligations had real consequences, often articulated through prophetic warnings. Isaiah's vision occurs in a period where many believed the nation had drifted from its commitments. The political alliances being formed with surrounding nations reflected not only strategic decisions but spiritual compromises. His encounter with the divine throne room thus becomes a powerful statement that Israel's true stability does not rest on political maneuvering, but on alignment with the holiness of its God. The throne itself, described as high and exalted, symbolizes authority that surpasses earthly kingship. In ancient thought, the elevation of a throne conveyed the superiority of a ruler. Excavations from Assyrian palaces reveal platforms and steps that raised the king above courtiers and visitors, emphasizing hierarchical order. Isaiah's depiction transcends these examples, presenting a throne beyond human reach. The divine figure seated upon it represents unmatched sovereignty, reminding Isaiah and his audience that earthly kings rise and fall, but the divine throne remains unchanged. The hem of the robe filling the temple further emphasizes this point. Garments in the ancient Near East had symbolic meaning beyond their material function. Kings and high officials wore decorated robes that represented their status and authority. A garment that filled a sacred space would have conveyed overwhelming majesty, dwarfing all earthly symbols. It suggests that the divine presence cannot be confined to human structures, even those built for worship. The temple, though central to Israel's identity, becomes secondary when the fullness of divine presence overwhelms it. Isaiah's vision thus intersects with multiple layers of ancient belief: political reality, ritual practice, temple theology, and cosmic kingship. Each element reinforces the others, creating a unified picture that shaped how his message would be heard. The experience he describes is not an isolated mystical event, but a revelation that speaks into the entire structure of Judah's world. It confronts impurity, challenges political complacency, reveals divine sovereignty, and transforms the prophet who receives it. The impact of such a vision extended far beyond Isaiah's own time. Later traditions within Judaism reflected deeply on scenes of heavenly worship and throne room imagery. Writings from the Dead Sea community describe angelic beings praising the divine in terms reminiscent of Isaiah's account. Early Christian literature likewise drew upon the themes of holiness, purification, and commission found here. The vision became a template for understanding divine human encounters, shaping theological reflection for centuries. What stands out most in this ancient account is how seamlessly it weaves together the human and the divine. Isaiah's fear is deeply human, rooted in cultural and religious beliefs about holiness and impurity. The seraphim, the smoke, the trembling thresholds, all convey the overwhelming reality of divine presence. Yet within this overwhelming scene, compassion emerges, purification is offered, a mission is given, and a relationship is forged that will guide Isaiah through the complexities of his prophetic career. This interplay of fear and transformation reflects a worldview in which the divine is not distant, but engages directly with humanity, revealing both the danger and the possibility inherent in such encounters. Through Isaiah's experience, the ancient world becomes more comprehensible. The architectural grandeur of the temple, the ritual significance of fire and purity, the political instability of Judah, and the cosmic vision of divine sovereignty all converge in this moment. It is a vision that transcends its historical setting, yet remains deeply rooted in it, offering insight not only into the theology of ancient Israel, but into the hopes and fears of a people navigating the uncertainties of their time. As Isaiah's vision unfolds, the interaction between the earthly temple and the heavenly realm becomes increasingly significant. The ancient world did not view these as separate spheres, but as interconnected layers of reality. Rituals performed in the physical sanctuary were believed to echo and participate in actions occurring in the unseen realm. When Isaiah witnesses divine majesty within the temple, he is encountering a truth that his contemporaries would have understood intuitively. Sacred space is porous, capable of revealing the deeper structure of creation itself. For Isaiah, this encounter is not an escape from the concerns of his age, but an entrance into the source from which those concerns could be understood. To grasp the weight of Isaiah's experience, one must consider how throne room imagery functioned within the broader, ancient, Near Eastern imagination. Across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Canaan, rulers portrayed themselves as representatives of the gods, often depicting their enthronement in terms that elevated their authority beyond human limits. Stone reliefs from Assyria illustrate kings seated upon elevated thrones, surrounded by winged beings who serve as protectors or attendants. These figures often exhibit a mixture of animal and human features, designed to convey vigilance, strength, and supernatural presence. Isaiah's contemporaries would have been familiar with such imagery through trade, diplomacy, and the circulation of artifacts. Yet, Isaiah's description carries a crucial difference. While surrounding cultures align their kings with divine authority, Isaiah presents the divine throne as utterly transcendent, untouchable, and unshared. There is no suggestion that Israel's king sits beside this throne or partakes in its glory. This stands in contrast to the claims made by foreign rulers who often portrayed themselves as chosen or empowered by the gods in a direct, quasi-divine relationship. In Isaiah's account, human kingship is placed firmly beneath the authority of the divine. This theological distinction becomes especially important during times when Political leaders sought to secure their power by adopting foreign customs or alliances. Isaiah's vision challenges such tendencies by reminding Judah that its stability rests not in external support, but in fidelity to the one whose throne stands above all earthly structures. The seraphim, whose presence surrounds the throne, contribute to this understanding. Their role is not ornamental, but functional. They proclaim the unbounded holiness of the divine, a quality that shapes every aspect of Israel's relationship with its God. Holiness, in this context, means more than moral purity. It conveys otherness, separateness, and a kind of radiant perfection that no created being can match. The seraphim's continual proclamation reflects an ongoing truth, not a temporary moment. Holiness is presented as an essential characteristic of the divine nature, permeating creation and defining the proper response of all beings who encounter it. The structure of their proclamation carries linguistic and theological significance. Ancient Hebrew used repetition to intensify meaning, and the threefold declaration served as a superlative. It expressed an attribute beyond comparison, establishing holiness as the central feature of divine identity. This emphasis would influence generations of worshippers, shaping liturgical traditions and theological reflection. In later Jewish texts, the heavenly realm is often depicted as resounding with praises of holiness, suggesting that Isaiah's vision became foundational for understanding celestial worship. Isaiah's response to this overwhelming scene reveals much about ancient conceptions of purity. The idea of impurity in Israelite thought was not limited to physical contamination. It encompassed ethical behavior, ritual observance, and social conduct. To declare oneself unclean was to acknowledge unfitness for proximity to the sacred. Isaiah's fear echoes the conviction that impurity could not survive direct exposure to holiness. This belief formed the basis for many rituals and regulations within Israel's worship system. It also shaped prophetic criticism, which often focused on the community's moral failings rather than ritual missteps alone. His confession also reflects a communal understanding of identity. In the ancient world, individuals were rarely seen as isolated beings. They belonged to families, tribes, and nations, and their actions were understood within this broader network. Isaiah's admission that he dwells among a people of unclean lips indicates awareness of shared responsibility. His impurity is not merely personal, but linked to the collective behavior of his nation. This communal dimension of sin and purification would play a central role in the theological messages delivered by prophets across Israel's history. The coal taken from the altar provides a vivid symbol of purification. In temple rituals, coals were used to ignite incense, burn offerings, and carry fire to various parts of the sanctuary. They represented the active presence of the divine within the sacrificial system. By applying a coal to Isaiah's lips, the seraph conveys a transformation rooted in the logic of the temple's worship. Fire purifies by consuming and transforming, suggesting that impurity is removed not by human effort, but by divine initiative. This aligns with themes found throughout Israel's traditions, where atonement is understood as a gift bestowed through ritual and grace rather than personal achievement. The theological significance of this transformation is profound. Isaiah moves from fear to readiness, demonstrating that divine holiness, while overwhelming, is not inaccessible. Purification bridges the gap between the human and the divine, enabling communication and commission. This dynamic is seen in other biblical narratives as well. Individuals who encounter the divine often experience both dread and reassurance, reflecting a worldview in which God is both majestic and compassionate. Isaiah's purification embodies this balance, illustrating that holiness does not only expose impurity, but offers the means to overcome it. After Isaiah is made ready, the divine voice declares a question that reverberates through the sanctuary. Such questions appear in various ancient texts where deities address their councils or representatives, seeking a messenger or a champion. In Israel's literature, the divine council represents a structured heavenly realm where decisions concerning earthly affairs are deliberated. Isaiah's presence within this scene signals his elevation to a role that transcends ordinary prophetic activity. He is not merely receiving a message, but participating in the deliberations that shape his nation's destiny. His willingness to respond reflects the transformation he has undergone. Fear gives way to resolve, and hesitation dissolves in the face of divine calling. Ancient audiences would have recognized this pattern in other prophetic narratives, where divine encounters redefined individuals' identities and missions. Yet, Isaiah's calling is marked by a seriousness rooted in the crisis of his time. Judah faced pressures from powerful empires, internal divisions, and wavering religious commitment. Isaiah stands at the intersection of these tensions, equipped to speak with authority, rooted not in political power, but in divine revelation. To grasp the full implications of Isaiah's role, one must consider the political and religious climate of Judah during his ministry. The death of Uzziah marked the end of a relatively stable period. His successor, Jotham, faced difficulties maintaining order, and the kingdom became increasingly entangled in conflicts with neighboring states. The rise of Assyria loomed over the region, threatening to swallow smaller nations and impose its cultural and political dominance. In such a context, prophetic voices carried immense weight. They addressed not only individual behavior, but national identity, calling the people to return to covenant faithfulness in a time of uncertainty. Isaiah's message, shaped by his vision, emphasized the holiness of the divine and the need for alignment between worship and ethical conduct. This emphasis challenged prevailing attitudes that reduced religion to ritual performance or political symbolism. Isaiah insisted that true stability would not come from alliances with foreign powers, but from trust in the one whose throne is exalted above all nations. This message would have been difficult to accept for leaders seeking immediate security in a volatile political landscape. Yet Isaiah's authority stemmed from a vision that exposed the inadequacy of purely human solutions. Understanding this dynamic requires appreciating how ancient Israel perceived covenant obligations. The covenant was not merely a legal agreement, but a relationship rooted in history, memory, and identity. The people understood themselves as chosen for a purpose, bound to live in a manner that reflected the character of their God. Violations of this covenant carried consequences not only for individuals, but for the entire community. Prophets served as guardians of the covenant, reminding the nation of its responsibilities and warning of the results of neglect. Isaiah's vision reinforces this role by grounding his message in an encounter that reveals the core of divine identity. The connection between holiness and justice becomes particularly significant in Isaiah's message. Holiness far from being a detached or isolated concept, shapes how the community treats the vulnerable, conducts its affairs, and worships in the temple. Isaiah's vision of divine majesty highlights the contrast between the divine realm and the moral failures of the nation. This contrast becomes central to his later teaching, where he emphasizes that ritual observance without ethical integrity is unacceptable. The throne room vision thus establishes the standard by which Israel's actions are judged, demonstrating that holiness demands a corresponding life of righteousness. The imagery of the temple, the holy fire, the trembling thresholds, and the heavenly proclamation all serve to underscore the unity between worship and life. For Isaiah, there is no division between the sacred and the ordinary. The holiness he witnessed encompasses every aspect of existence, challenging individuals in the community to embody the covenant in their daily actions. This holistic understanding of holiness distinguishes Isaiah's message from purely ritualistic approaches found in some ancient traditions. It aligns worship with justice, ritual with morality, and divine majesty with human responsibility. Through Isaiah's encounter, the ancient world becomes a place where divine presence is both awe-inspiring and transformative. The elements of the vision, throne, seraphim, smoke, trembling pillars, and purification, reveal a reality in which the divine engages directly with humanity. This engagement is not limited to dramatic moments, but permeates the entire structure of existence. Isaiah's world was one in which divine presence shaped political decisions, ethical behavior, and communal identity. The vision reinforces this worldview, offering a profound reminder that the divine is neither distant nor indifferent, but deeply invested in the world. The significance of this ancient encounter extends far into the future, influencing interpretations of holiness, prophecy, and divine calling across centuries. Yet its roots remain firmly planted in Isaiah's historical moment. The temple's architecture, the political tensions of Judah, and the religious traditions of Israel all contribute to the depth of this vision. It is a moment that reveals the heart of ancient faith, a faith that sees the world as infused with divine presence, where holiness confronts impurity and transforms those who are willing to receive its touch. The vision Isaiah received did not stand in isolation from the broader religious environment of his world. It belonged to a larger tapestry of belief, ritual, expectation, and memory that shaped how the people of Judah understood their place in the cosmos. To appreciate Isaiah's experience fully, one must enter this world and grasp how ancient Israel perceived holiness, covenant, and the mysterious relationship between heaven and earth. The themes expressed within the temple vision, purity, judgment, divine sovereignty, and the calling of a messenger, resonate across Israel's history, forming an intricate network of meaning that guided the nation's understanding of its relationship with the divine. The concept of divine kingship played a central role in this worldview. While modern readers may think of kingship in political terms, ancient Israel saw it as a cosmic reality. The divine was not only ruler over a nation, but sovereign over the entire created order. Stories of creation in Israel's tradition reflect this understanding. The world was fashioned not through conflict among rival gods, as in some surrounding myths, but through authoritative speech that brought order out of chaos. This vision of a sovereign deity standing above the world shaped how Israel understood its covenant and worship. Isaiah's vision of the throne reinforces this theme by emphasizing the exalted position of the divine, unchallenged by earthly or heavenly forces. The grandeur of the throne scene becomes even more striking when set against the political backdrop of Isaiah's time. Judah was a small kingdom caught between powerful empires. Assyria, rising rapidly under kings such as Tiglath-Pileser, brought fear across the region. The might of Assyria was not merely military, it was ideological. Assyrian propaganda presented its kings as rulers appointed by the gods, destined to subdue nations and enforce order on the world. Their inscriptions boasted of conquests, tributes, and the submission of lesser peoples. For many in Judah, the temptation to secure safety through alliance with such a power would have been strong. Yet, Isaiah's vision presented a higher authority, one that dwarfed even the grandest claims of Assyrian kingship. This contrast provides a key to understanding Isaiah's message in the years that followed. He did not discourage political alliances simply because they were impractical, but because they betrayed a misplaced trust. The nation's identity did not rest in its military strength or diplomatic skill, but in its covenant relationship with the one seated on the throne. Isaiah's vision becomes a foundation for this conviction, illustrating that human strategies are insufficient when divorced from faithfulness to the divine will. The holiness he witnessed demands exclusive allegiance, and the throne he saw exposes the fragility of earthly power. The seraphim contribute further nuance to this understanding. Their role as attendants in the divine realm underscores the majesty of the one they serve. Their burning essence and six-winged form suggest both power and humility, characteristics that ancient audiences would have recognized as appropriate for beings in the presence of the divine. Their proclamation of holiness fills the space with meaning that reverberates beyond the temple. Holiness, in this context, is not a passive attribute, but an active force that shapes reality. It defines the moral order, governs the relationship between the divine and the human, and sets the standard for covenant faithfulness. This understanding of holiness influenced Israel's ethical and ritual life. Holiness involved separation from impurity, but it also involved living in accordance with the divine character. Prophets like Isaiah emphasized that ethical behavior, justice, mercy, humility was essential to maintaining covenant fidelity. Ritual observance, though important, could not replace righteousness in daily life. Isaiah's contemporaries would have understood this emphasis as a return to the foundational principles of their faith, rooted in the covenant established generations earlier. The trembling thresholds and overwhelming smoke described in the vision evoke earlier narratives in Israel's tradition. When Moses encountered the divine at Sinai, the mountain shook and smoke rose like a furnace. The people trembled, fearful of approaching too closely. The tabernacle, precursor to the temple, was filled with cloud when the divine presence descended, signifying both intimacy and concealment. These precedents would have informed how Isaiah and his audience interpreted his experience. They would have recognized that he had entered a realm accessible only through divine invitation, a place where holiness dwelled with unparalleled intensity. The purification of Isaiah through the burning coal deepens the connection between vision and ritual. In temple practice, sacrifices offered on the altar sought to restore relationship between the divine and the people. Blood, fire, and incense all played roles in atonement and sanctification. The coal that touches Isaiah's lips symbolizes the transformative power of these rituals, yet elevated beyond their physical form. It indicates that true purification originates in the divine initiative. Isaiah does not purify himself. He receives purification as a gift. This theme echoes throughout Israel's history, where divine grace often precedes human response. By receiving purification, Isaiah becomes equipped to speak on behalf of the divine. Prophets served as intermediaries, delivering messages that addressed both immediate circumstances and deeper theological truths. Isaiah's calling, rooted in his transformative encounter, establishes him as a figure uniquely prepared to interpret the events of his time. His authority stems not from lineage or social status, but from a direct encounter that aligns him with the divine will. This alignment sets the stage for his ministry, which extends across multiple reigns and addresses issues ranging from social injustice to international diplomacy. The question that follows, seeking a messenger, presents a glimpse into the heavenly deliberations that ancient Israel believed influenced earthly affairs. The concept of a divine council appears in various parts of Israel's literature, where the divine presides over assemblies of heavenly beings. These councils discuss matters of judgment, guidance, or intervention. Isaiah's presence in such a moment underscores the profound nature of his calling. He is not merely a witness, but a participant, invited to respond to a question that shapes the trajectory of his mission. His response reflects the transformation effected by his purification. The dread that once gripped him has been replaced by readiness. He offers himself without hesitation, demonstrating that the divine encounter has reshaped his identity and purpose. This willingness aligns with broader patterns in prophetic literature, where encounters with the divine produce profound shifts in self-understanding. For Isaiah, the shift is immediate and enduring, preparing him to confront the challenges of his time with unwavering conviction. The implications of Isaiah's calling become clearer when exploring the religious and ethical climate of Judah during his ministry. The nation faced internal struggles related to social inequality, idol worship, and moral compromise. Wealthy elites often exploited the vulnerable, while religious practices became increasingly disconnected from ethical behavior. Isaiah, grounded in his vision of holiness, confronted these issues directly. His messages emphasized that genuine worship required justice and righteousness. He warned that ritual offerings without ethical integrity were unacceptable to the divine. This emphasis on ethical conduct aligns with the broader themes of Israel's covenant tradition. The covenant outlined not only ritual obligations but also moral expectations, justice for the poor, fair treatment of the marginalized, and fidelity in relationships were central components of covenant life. Isaiah's critique of societal behavior revealed that these expectations were being neglected. His vision of the divine throne room provided the moral authority behind this critique, reminding the nation that holiness demands alignment between worship and conduct. In addition to social issues, Judah faced theological challenges stemming from interactions with surrounding cultures. Assyrian influence threatened not only political autonomy, but religious identity. The grandeur of Assyrian kings, their impressive architecture, and their claims of divine sanction could tempt nations to adopt foreign practices or beliefs. Isaiah's vision counters this by presenting a divine realm far surpassing anything imagined by Assyrian ideology. The seraphim, the trembling thresholds, and the overwhelming holiness all serve to elevate the divine authority of Israel's God above that of any earthly ruler. This theological clarity was essential for a nation navigating complex political realities. Judah stood at a crossroads, pressured to choose between reliance on foreign powers and trust in its covenant relationship. Isaiah's message offered a path grounded in faithfulness, calling the nation to reaffirm its commitment to the divine will. His vision demonstrated that true security lay not in alliances or military strength, but in adherence to the principles of justice, righteousness, and holiness. The interplay between divine sovereignty and human responsibility forms a central theme in Isaiah's message. While the vision emphasizes the majesty of the divine, it also highlights the role of humans in responding to this majesty. Isaiah is purified, commissioned, and sent, illustrating that divine initiatives invite human participation. The nation likewise is called to align its actions with the divine character. This balance between divine authority and human responsibility permeates Israel's understanding of the covenant, shaping its theology and ethical expectations. The ancient world in which Isaiah lived was one of constant tension between competing claims of power. Empires rose and fell, each asserting its dominance and seeking to expand its influence. In the midst of these shifting dynamics, Isaiah's vision provided a stable reference point. It revealed a throne that could not be shaken, a holiness that could not be compromised, and a calling that transcended political upheaval. This stability offered hope to a nation facing uncertainty, reminding them that their identity was rooted not in circumstances, but in their relationship with the divine. The influence of Isaiah's vision extended beyond his immediate context. Later, Jewish traditions drew from its imagery to describe heavenly worship, divine encounters, and the role of angelic beings. Early Christian writings also incorporated themes of holiness, purification, and divine calling, reflecting the enduring power of Isaiah's experience. Through these traditions, the vision became a cornerstone for understanding the relationship between the divine and human realms, shaping religious thought for generations. Yet its significance remains grounded in the historical moment in which it occurred. The temple, the political tensions, the ethical concerns, and the religious expectations all contribute to the depth of the vision. It is a moment that reveals the heart of ancient faith, a holiness that confronts impurity, a sovereignty that surpasses earthly power, and a calling that transforms those who encounter it. The world Isaiah inhabited becomes vivid through this encounter, illuminating the profound connection between divine revelation and human history. The power of Isaiah's encounter with the divine throne room becomes clearer when one examines the deeper patterns of thought and worship that shaped ancient Israel. While the vision presents a moment of extraordinary revelation, its themes correspond closely to the beliefs, rituals, and expectations embedded within Israel's long-standing tradition. The people of Judah lived in a world where the divine was not distant, but present within the rhythms of daily life and national identity. This sense of nearness often inspired awe and reverence, yet it also exposed tensions between the ideals of covenant faithfulness and the realities of human conduct. Isaiah's vision sits at the intersection of these tensions, illuminating the nature of holiness while challenging the community to reflect upon its place within the divine purpose. One of the most striking features of Isaiah's account is the overwhelming emphasis on holiness. Holiness was not merely a theological concept. It was a lived reality that shaped how the community understood its relationship to the divine. The Hebrew word associated with holiness conveys separation, distinctness, and majesty. It implies that the divine is utterly unlike anything else in creation. This understanding stems from earlier narratives, where the divine presence appeared in fire, cloud, or overwhelming light, emphasizing that human beings could not approach without preparation. Isaiah's vision reinforces this theme by presenting a realm filled with holiness so intense that even heavenly beings veil themselves in reverence. This portrayal of holiness demanded that the people of Israel cultivate ethical behavior consistent with the divine character. The laws given to the nation emphasized justice, compassion, and moral integrity, indicating that holiness involved much more than ritual purity. Prophets repeatedly warned that sacrifices and offerings were insufficient if accompanied by injustice or neglect of the vulnerable. Isaiah's vision underscores this point by placing holiness at the center of divine identity, suggesting that the community must align its behavior with this defining characteristic. Isaiah's fear upon witnessing the divine throne room reflects a belief deeply rooted in his culture. Exposure to holiness could be dangerous. Ancient traditions taught that impurity could not survive the presence of the divine. This was not understood as punishment, but as a natural consequence, similar to the way fire consumes what is combustible. The trembling thresholds, the smoke filling the temple, and Isaiah's immediate sense of unworthiness all reflect this worldview. He recognizes that his own imperfection and that of his nation stands in stark contrast to the overwhelming purity of the divine presence. His confession, focusing on the impurity of the lips, carries symbolic meaning. Speech was central to the prophetic vocation, serving as the primary means through which divine messages were conveyed. To acknowledge unclean lips was to recognize the inadequacy of one's ability to communicate truthfully or worthily before the divine. Furthermore, by identifying himself with a people of unclean lips, Isaiah embraces the communal nature of sin. In the ancient world, individuals were understood in terms of their relationships with family, tribe, and nation. Isaiah's confession reveals an awareness that his own shortcomings are intertwined with those of his community. The seraph's act of purification, using a burning coal from the altar, represents a profound theological statement. In the temple's ritual system, the altar was the focal point of atonement. Sacrifices offered there symbolized the restoration of relationship between the divine and the people. Coals from this altar held significant power, representing the fiery presence that consumed offerings and signaled divine acceptance. When the seraph applies a coal to Isaiah's lips, it suggests that the purification available through ritual is now being enacted in an intensified, personalized form. It reveals a divine initiative that goes beyond the established system, emphasizing that true transformation originates from the divine will rather than human effort. This act of purification enables Isaiah to respond to the divine call with confidence. His readiness stands in contrast to his earlier dread, illustrating the transformative power of divine grace. The shift in his posture from fearing destruction to volunteering for a mission highlights the central role of purification in preparing individuals for divine service. This pattern appears in various prophetic narratives where encounters with the divine produce profound changes in the individuals involved. In Isaiah's case, the transformation equips him to confront the complex realities of his time, delivering messages that challenge, warn, and ultimately guide the nation. To understand the weight of Isaiah's calling, it is essential to examine the religious landscape of Judah during his ministry. The people faced competing influences from surrounding cultures, particularly as foreign powers exerted political and cultural pressure. Assyrian dominance brought with it not only military threat, but exposure to foreign religious practices. Assyrian kings portrayed themselves as chosen by the gods, often demanding tribute and loyalty that carried religious undertones. This ideological pressure could lead smaller nations to adopt or adapt foreign customs in an attempt to secure favor or protection. Isaiah's vision counters this influence by presenting a divine authority that surpasses all earthly claims. The throne he witnesses stands above any human throne, and the heavenly attendants who surround it emphasize the unmatched majesty of the divine. This imagery would have strengthened the resolve of those seeking to maintain Israel's distinct religious identity in the face of powerful external forces. The vision serves as a reminder that the stability of Judah does not depend on alliances with empires, but on fidelity to the divine covenant. Beyond political concerns, Judah grappled with internal issues related to social justice and ethical conduct. Wealth disparities had increased, and the powerful often took advantage of the vulnerable. Prophets repeatedly condemned these injustices, emphasizing that they violated the covenant's call to righteousness. Isaiah's later messages reflect deep concern for the oppressed, the orphaned, and the marginalized. His vision of holiness, therefore, carries practical implications. A community shaped by holiness must reflect that holiness in its treatment of others. Ethical behavior becomes an expression of worship, inseparable from ritual practice. The temple played a central role in this dynamic. As the focal point of worship, it symbolized the presence of the divine among the people. Yet, despite its significance, the temple could become a place where ritual was performed without corresponding ethical integrity. Isaiah's critique of empty worship highlights the danger of disconnecting ritual from righteousness. The vision he received anchors his message by demonstrating that divine holiness demands more than outward observance. It requires a transformation of the heart, manifesting in justice, compassion, and fidelity. The imagery of Isaiah's vision also reflects broader ancient Near Eastern ideas about the relationship between the seen and unseen realms. Ancient peoples often viewed the cosmos as layered, with the divine realm operating parallel to the human world. Temples were thought to mirror heavenly structures, serving as earthly counterparts to celestial sanctuaries. Isaiah's vision takes this concept and infuses it with theological depth. The earthly temple becomes a portal through which the prophet glimpses the true throne room, revealing that divine authority extends beyond the physical space while also being intimately connected to it. Understanding this cosmological perspective helps illuminate the impact of the vision on Isaiah's ministry. His messages emphasize that the divine is not confined to ritual spaces, but is actively involved in the course of history. The throne he witnessed stands over nations, guiding and judging them according to divine standards. This understanding allows Isaiah to interpret political events not merely as human actions, but as part of a larger divine purpose. His messages frequently link human decisions with divine consequences, underscoring the belief that history unfolds under the watchful authority of the one seated on the throne. The experience of the divine realm reshapes Isaiah's understanding of his role as a messenger. Prophets in Israel served multiple functions. They brought warnings, offered guidance, interpreted events, and reminded the people of their covenant obligations. Isaiah's calling, grounded in his transformative vision, equips him to fulfill these roles with authority and clarity. His ministry spans decades, addressing changing circumstances while maintaining a consistent message rooted in holiness and covenant faithfulness. Isaiah's vision also influences later theological developments, becoming a foundational text for understanding divine transcendence and immanence. The imagery of the exalted throne emphasizes divine transcendence, suggesting that the divine authority surpasses earthly limitations. Yet, the divine initiative in purifying and commissioning Isaiah reveals immanence, demonstrating involvement in human affairs. This duality becomes a defining characteristic of Israel's theology, shaping how future generations understand the divine presence within the world. The combination of overwhelming majesty and intimate purification embodies a central tension in ancient Israel's faith. The divine is both beyond comprehension and deeply engaged with humanity. Isaiah's vision captures this tension in a way that few passages do. The holiness that fills the temple confronts human impurity, yet it also provides the means for transformation. The divine authority that stands above nations engages personally with an individual, calling him to participate in the unfolding of history. This interplay forms the foundation of Isaiah's message, influencing the theological landscape for centuries. In examining this vision, one must recognize the depth of Isaiah's cultural and religious world. His encounter reflects themes present in Israel's rituals, narratives, and ethical teachings. It challenges assumptions, calls for renewal, and reveals the heart of the divine character. The people of Judah, facing political pressure and internal decay, would have found in this vision both warning and hope. It demands reverence, yet offers transformation, insisting that true stability lies not in external power, but in alignment with divine holiness. The legacy of Isaiah's vision endures because it speaks to fundamental questions about the nature of the divine, the purpose of humanity, and the structure of reality. It reveals a world in which the divine is not distant, but present, not passive, but active, not indifferent, but engaged. Through this encounter, the ancient world becomes illuminated with meaning, showing how holiness shapes life, worship, and history. Isaiah's experience continues to resonate because it captures the essence of a faith that sees the world as infused with divine purpose, where human actions matter and where transformation is possible through the initiative of the divine. The vision Isaiah received in the temple does more than reveal the nature of divine holiness. It also exposes the moral and spiritual condition of his nation. Judah stood at a critical point in its history, a moment shaped by political upheaval, economic disparity, and shifting cultural influences. These pressures did not exist in isolation. They interacted with deeply rooted religious expectations and ethical responsibilities that had defined the community for generations. Isaiah's vision, therefore, becomes a lens through which the people of Judah were invited to understand the true state of their society. The holiness he witnessed was not an abstract ideal, but a living standard that confronted their actions, beliefs, and aspirations. To appreciate the weight of Isaiah's message, one must understand the covenantal identity that lay at the heart of Israel's self-understanding. The covenant established between the divine and the people was not merely a pact, but a relationship grounded in trust, loyalty, and shared purpose. It shaped their laws, rituals, and communal life. The people believed that they had been chosen to embody divine justice and righteousness in a world marked by violence and oppression. This sense of calling was central to their identity, distinguishing them from surrounding nations. Yet, by Isaiah's time, many within the nation had lost sight of this calling. The rituals of the temple continued, but ethical conduct had eroded. Isaiah's vision confronted this disconnect, calling the nation back to its foundational mission. The ethical failures of Judah were not hidden. Prophets before and after Isaiah observed the growing disparity between the wealthy and the poor. Landowners accumulated property at the expense of small farmers, creating economic instability and social resentment. Judges accepted bribes, undermining trust in legal institutions. Merchants manipulated weights and measures, exploiting those who relied on fair trade. These injustices struck at the heart of the covenant, which demanded integrity, compassion, and fairness. Isaiah's critique of such behavior reflects his conviction that genuine worship cannot be separated from righteous conduct. The holiness he witnessed demanded a transformation that extended beyond ritual observance to encompass every aspect of life. The tension between ritual and ethics becomes clearer when examining the role of the temple in Judah's society. The temple was a place of profound significance, symbolizing the presence of the divine among the people. Rituals performed there affirmed the covenant relationship and maintained the community's spiritual health. Yet, these rituals could become hollow if divorced from ethical integrity. Isaiah, drawing from his vision, emphasized that sacrifice without justice was unacceptable. The divine does not desire rituals performed in isolation from moral responsibility. This message, though challenging, aligned with the broader tradition that placed justice and mercy at the center of covenant life. The political context of Isaiah's ministry further complicates this picture. Judah faced increasing pressure from Assyria, whose military might and ideological claims threatened the stability of the region. Some leaders advocated for alliances with foreign powers, believing that political maneuvering could secure the nation's future. These alliances often carried religious implications, introducing foreign practices that compromised Israel's distinct identity. Isaiah, rooted in the vision of divine sovereignty, warned against such strategies. He argued that trust in human power would fail, while trust in the divine covenant would endure. His message challenged the nation to reassess its priorities, recognizing that true security lay not in alliances, but in faithfulness. The reign of King Ahaz provides a clear example of the tensions facing Judah. Ahaz confronted threats from neighboring states and considered seeking help from Assyria. Isaiah opposed this approach, urging the king to trust in the divine rather than foreign powers. The prophet's counsel was not merely political advice, but a theological statement grounded in the vision he had received. The exalted throne he witnessed represented a sovereignty that surpassed any earthly empire. For Isaiah, relying on Assyria was equivalent to abandoning trust in the one true king whose throne could not be shaken. Despite Isaiah's warnings, the temptation to seek security through political alliances persisted. This tension between trust in the divine and reliance on human power becomes a recurring theme throughout Isaiah's messages. It reflects a broader struggle within the nation to balance faith with practical concerns. The people faced real threats, and the pressure to adopt foreign customs or seek powerful allies was significant. Yet Isaiah's vision served as a constant reminder that the divine authority overseeing history was more enduring than any human strategy. His message called the nation to a higher perspective, urging them to view their circumstances through the lens of divine holiness and sovereignty. The imagery of the seraphim contributes to this perspective by reinforcing the transcendence of the divine. Their presence in the throne room symbolizes the separation between the divine realm and human affairs. Yet their proclamation of holiness also links the two realms, suggesting that divine standards apply to earthly conduct. The contrast between the purity of the heavenly realm and the impurity of the earthly community becomes a powerful motivator for ethical renewal. Isaiah's experience thus provides a model for understanding how divine revelation informs human responsibility. The concept of purity, central to Isaiah's vision, carries implications that extend beyond ritual practice. In ancient Israel, purity involved both physical and moral dimensions. Ritual purity ensured that individuals could participate in worship, while moral purity involved living in accordance with the ethical principles of the covenant. The two aspects were interconnected, reflecting a holistic understanding of human behavior. Isaiah's confession of unclean lips reveals his awareness of this connection. His purification by the burning coal symbolizes the integration of ritual and moral transformation. The vision demonstrates that purity is essential not only for worship, but for ethical living. The ethical dimension of purity becomes even more significant when considering the role of speech in Israel's religious and social life. Speech had the power to bless or curse, to build up or tear down, to convey truth or deceive. Prophetic speech carried particular weight, shaping the nation's understanding of its relationship with the divine. Isaiah's purification prepared him to speak with authority, ensuring that his words would reflect the divine will rather than human imperfection. This preparation underscores the importance of integrity in communication, a theme that appears throughout Isaiah's messages. The tension between divine holiness and human failure also shapes Isaiah's understanding of judgment. Judgment in Israel's tradition was not merely punitive. It served as a means of restoring the covenant relationship by confronting and correcting the nation's failings. Isaiah's messages often contain warnings of consequences that would follow continued neglect of ethical responsibilities. These warnings were rooted in the vision of holiness that he had witnessed. The divine cannot overlook injustice or impurity without undermining the very nature of holiness. Judgment becomes a necessary response to covenant violation, yet it is always accompanied by the possibility of restoration. This dual theme of judgment and restoration emerges in Isaiah's teachings on the remnant. The idea of a remnant refers to a group of individuals who remain faithful despite widespread unfaithfulness. This concept appears throughout Israel's history, particularly during times of crisis. Isaiah's vision of the holy seed preserved like a stump after a tree is cut down, symbolizes the enduring hope that lies at the heart of the covenant. Even when judgment is necessary, the divine remains committed to the covenant relationship. The remnant becomes a sign of continuity, ensuring that the divine purpose will not be thwarted by human failure. The remnant motif also reflects the belief that divine purposes unfold within history, not outside of it. The people of Israel understood their destiny as intertwined with the divine will, shaping their identity and guiding their actions. Isaiah's messages emphasize that history is not random, but directed by a sovereign authority. His vision of the throne room provides the theological foundation for this belief, illustrating that the divine oversees the course of nations and holds them accountable. This perspective becomes crucial for understanding the events that unfold during Isaiah's ministry as Judah navigates political challenges and internal moral decay. The interplay between divine sovereignty and human responsibility remains a defining theme throughout Isaiah's teachings. The vision reveals a deity who is both transcendent and engaged, both holy and compassionate. This duality shapes the expectations placed upon the community. They are called to reflect divine holiness in their ethical conduct, yet they are also invited to trust in the divine presence during times of uncertainty. Isaiah's messages hold these themes together, refusing to separate worship from ethics or divine authority from human accountability. The transformation Isaiah experiences in the vision models the transformation available to the nation. His purification and calling illustrate the possibility of renewal, even in the midst of impurity. This possibility becomes central to Isaiah's later teachings, which explore themes of restoration, hope, and the enduring faithfulness of the divine. The vision serves as the foundation for these themes, demonstrating that holiness does not merely expose impurity, but provides the means to overcome it. The people of Judah, despite their failures, remain within the reach of divine transformation. The ethical implications of the vision extend beyond the immediate context of Isaiah's ministry. Later, Jewish and Christian interpretations draw from this imagery to explore questions of purity, calling, and divine engagement. The vision becomes a touchstone for understanding the relationship between the divine and humanity, emphasizing the central role of holiness in shaping moral behavior. Its enduring impact testifies to the depth and complexity of Isaiah's encounter, which continues to inspire reflection across centuries. The world Isaiah inhabited becomes clearer through the lens of this vision. His experience reveals the interconnectedness of temple worship, ethical behavior, political decisions, and divine sovereignty. The ancient people of Judah lived in a world where the divine was deeply involved in human affairs, guiding, judging, and transforming. Isaiah's vision captures this reality with unmatched depth, offering insight into the heart of ancient faith. It presents a holiness that confronts impurity, a sovereignty that surpasses earthly power, and a calling that invites participation in the unfolding of history. Isaiah's experience within the temple introduced him to a realm of holiness that surpassed anything known in the rituals or theology of his time. Yet, the significance of this encounter becomes even more profound when examined through the lens of how ancient Israel understood divine communication. The people believed that the divine spoke through history, through leaders, and through the prophetic voice. Isaiah's calling brought him into this long-standing tradition, but his vision placed him within it in a uniquely elevated manner. The throne room was not merely a symbol of divine authority. It was the environment in which Isaiah's prophetic identity was shaped, refined, and empowered. His calling was not an announcement, but an encounter that established a direct link between the holiness he witnessed and the messages he would deliver throughout his ministry. To appreciate the implications of this, one must understand how prophecy functioned within ancient Israel. Prophets were not fortune tellers, but interpreters of reality. They evaluated social conditions, political decisions, and religious practices through the lens of the covenant. Their messages often pointed to consequences that naturally flowed from violation of divine standards. Prophecy, therefore, required not only moral clarity, but deep insight into the human condition and the dynamics of society. Isaiah's vision provided the foundation for this clarity. The holiness he saw became the measure by which he assessed the behavior of the people and their leaders. His understanding of divine sovereignty positioned him to critique alliances, warn of impending danger, and call for repentance. The authority of a prophet in ancient Israel depended heavily on the perceived authenticity of the divine message. Isaiah's encounter served as the ultimate validation. It was a direct revelation that shaped every aspect of his ministry. While other prophets also received divine messages, Isaiah's throne room vision stands among the most vivid descriptions of heavenly reality in the Hebrew Scriptures. This experience became a touchstone for his prophetic voice, grounding his messages in the unshakable authority of the divine throne. His warnings and promises were not rooted in speculation or political analysis alone, but in a vision of the divine holiness that governed all creation. The cultural and historical context of Isaiah's ministry further highlights the importance of this foundation. Judah faced a series of crises during his lifetime, each posing significant moral and political challenges. The rise of Assyria, with its aggressive expansion and formidable military strength, created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Assyrian kings presented themselves as agents of cosmic order, claiming divine sanction for their conquests. Their inscriptions portrayed them as shepherds appointed by the gods to rule over the nations. This ideological framework threatened to overshadow the distinct identity of Israel, which rested on its covenant relationship with the divine. Isaiah's vision directly countered Assyrian ideology. The throne he witnessed dwarfed any claims made by earthly rulers. The seraphim who attended the divine throne surpassed in majesty any winged figures carved into Assyrian palace walls. The proclamation of holiness offered a theological challenge to the political and religious claims of empire. Isaiah's ministry, therefore, involved not only ethical exhortation, but ideological resistance. He called the people to trust in the divine rather than in the promises of foreign powers. His messages often warned against alliances with nations whose beliefs and practices contradicted the covenant. In a world dominated by imperial claims, Isaiah's vision reaffirmed that ultimate authority rested with the one seated above all other thrones. This ideological tension becomes particularly evident in the events surrounding the Syro-Ephraimite crisis. During this period, Judah faced pressure from neighboring kingdoms seeking to resist Assyrian domination. They attempted to compel Judah into an alliance, threatening invasion if it refused. King Ahaz, facing this pressure, considered appealing to Assyria for support. Isaiah, drawing from the authority of his vision, urged the king to stand firm and trust in the covenant. His messages emphasized that fear-driven alliances would undermine Judah's identity and expose the nation to greater danger. While Ahaz ultimately chose political expediency, Isaiah's words reveal the depth of his conviction that the divine throne governed the fate of nations. This conviction did not blind Isaiah to the realities of political life. On the contrary, his insights into political events reflect a deep understanding of the forces shaping his world. He recognized the ambitions of Assyria, the instability of neighboring states, and the internal vulnerabilities within Judah. Yet, his interpretation of these forces was shaped by his vision. He perceived political developments not as isolated events, but as elements within a broader tapestry governed by divine sovereignty. This perspective allowed him to speak with confidence, even when his messages challenged the prevailing wisdom of political leaders. Isaiah's emphasis on ethical behavior also stems from this perspective. The holiness he witnessed demanded more than ritual observance. It required justice, compassion, and integrity. Isaiah condemned those who exploited the poor, ignored the vulnerable, and manipulated the legal system. He reminded the people that their actions reflected their covenant relationship. The vision of the throne room provided the moral framework for these critiques. It revealed that the divine cared deeply about the behavior of the community and would not overlook injustice. This ethical emphasis becomes a hallmark of Isaiah's ministry, influencing later prophetic writings and shaping the development of ethical monotheism. The ethical dimension of Isaiah's message becomes particularly clear when examining his critiques of worship practices. While the people continued to offer sacrifices and observe rituals, Isaiah argued that these actions were meaningless without corresponding ethical behavior. The divine, he insisted, desired righteousness rather than empty ritual. This message echoes earlier teachings within Israel's tradition, where obedience to the divine will involve both ritual and ethical dimensions. Isaiah's critique underscores the unity of these aspects, emphasizing that true worship requires a life aligned with divine holiness. His vision revealed the standard by which worship should be assessed, linking ritual purity to moral integrity. This ethical critique extended to the leadership of Judah. Isaiah held kings and officials accountable for their actions, reminding them that their authority derived from the divine. When leaders neglected justice or pursued policies contrary to the covenant, Isaiah did not hesitate to challenge them. His willingness to speak truth to power reflects the strength he drew from his vision. The throne room he witnessed represented an authority far greater than any earthly ruler. This gave him the courage to confront kings, urging them to govern with righteousness and humility. The concept of the remnant becomes increasingly significant in this context. As Isaiah observed the moral decline of the nation, he understood that not all would respond to the call for repentance. Yet, the divine purpose would not fail. The idea of a remnant, a group of faithful individuals preserved through judgment, emerges as a recurring theme in his messages. This concept reflects both divine justice and divine mercy. Judgment would cleanse the nation, removing corruption and restoring integrity. Yet, even in judgment, a seed of hope remained. The remnant symbolized continuity, ensuring that the covenant relationship would endure despite human failure. This theme would become particularly important during the traumatic events that followed Isaiah's ministry, offering hope to those who survived the upheavals of history. The imagery of the stump and the holy seed captures this theme with striking clarity. Like a tree cut down but not destroyed, the nation would experience judgment, yet retain the potential for renewal. This metaphor reflects agricultural imagery familiar to Isaiah's audience, who understood the resilience of certain trees that could regenerate from their roots. It also conveys theological depth, suggesting that the divine purpose is rooted so deeply in history that no external force can uproot it. The remnant embodies this resilience, providing a foundation for future restoration. Isaiah's vision, therefore, not only shapes his own ministry, but offers a framework for understanding the larger narrative of Israel's history. The divine throne stands over the unfolding of events, guiding and judging according to divine standards. Human actions matter profoundly, yet they occur within a world governed by a sovereignty that surpasses human understanding. This interplay between human responsibility and divine authority becomes a defining feature of Isaiah's thought, influencing generations of interpreters. The throne room vision also resonates with later Jewish and early Christian literature, which often draws upon its imagery to explore themes of worship, purity, and divine majesty. The seraphim, the proclamation of holiness, and the exalted throne become symbols of the divine realm that continue to shape religious imagination. Yet, despite its enduring influence, the vision remains deeply rooted in the specific historical moment of Isaiah's calling. It addresses the concerns of his time while revealing truths that transcend historical boundaries. The world Isaiah inhabited becomes more comprehensible through this lens. The political challenges, ethical failures, and religious tensions of his time all intersect with the themes of his vision. His calling emerges as a response to these challenges, equipping him to speak with authority and insight. The vision's emphasis on holiness, sovereignty, and purification provides the foundation upon which his entire ministry rests. Through this encounter, Isaiah becomes a messenger whose words echo across history, guiding communities through periods of crisis and renewal. Viewed in this light, the throne room vision is not merely an extraordinary event, but a revelation of the fundamental structure of reality as understood in the ancient world. It exposes the moral and spiritual dimensions of history, showing how divine purpose unfolds within the complexities of human affairs. It calls individuals and nations to align themselves with holiness, justice, and righteousness. It offers hope that transcends judgment and reveals the enduring faithfulness of the divine. Isaiah's vision of the divine throne room becomes especially significant when explored through the lens of how ancient Israel understood national destiny. The people did not view their history as a series of random events, but as a coherent narrative shaped by covenant, obedience, and divine purpose. Blessings and hardships were understood within this framework, interpreted as responses to the nation's faithfulness or failure. Isaiah's ministry occurs at a time when this understanding was deeply tested. The threats confronting Judah were not merely military. They challenged the very foundations upon which the people believed their identity rested. His vision provided a theological anchor in this time of instability, offering clarity on the meaning of judgment and the possibility of restoration. To grasp the weight of Isaiah's message, one must consider the theological significance of judgment in ancient Israel. judgment was not merely punitive, but corrective. It served as a mechanism by which the divine sought to restore the covenant relationship. Earlier narratives in Israel's history illustrate this dynamic. Periods of hardship were often interpreted as consequences of turning away from covenant obligations, yet they were also opportunities for renewal. Isaiah's warnings continue this tradition, emphasizing that judgment arises not from abandonment, but from commitment. The divine remains invested in the destiny of the nation, and judgment becomes an expression of that enduring relationship. Within this framework, Isaiah's vision of the throne room takes on new meaning. The holiness he witnessed not only revealed the inadequacy of the nation, but also established the possibility of renewal. Holiness does not tolerate impurity, yet it also offers the means by which impurity can be overcome. Isaiah's purification by the burning coal becomes a symbol of this dynamic. It demonstrates that transformation is possible, even for those who feel unworthy. This theme resonates throughout Isaiah's later messages, where the possibility of restoration always stands alongside warnings of judgment. The concept of a hardened heart becomes a crucial element in this discussion. When Isaiah receives his commission, he learns that his messages will not immediately produce repentance. Instead, they will harden the hearts of the people. This idea can seem perplexing from a modern perspective, yet it aligns with the ancient understanding of judgment as a process. Hardening represents the culmination of choices already made, a natural consequence of persistent disobedience. Isaiah's role in this process underscores the seriousness of the situation. His words would expose the true condition of the people's hearts, revealing whether they were aligned with the covenant or resistant to its demands. This theme appears in earlier biblical narratives as well. In the story of Egypt, the repeated hardening of the ruler's heart becomes a means by which divine justice is revealed. The same principle applies to Isaiah's audience. Their response to his message would reveal the depth of their commitment to the covenant. Hardening, therefore, is not imposed arbitrarily, but emerges from the interplay between divine holiness and human resistance. Isaiah's vision provides the theological foundation for this understanding, showing that holiness confronts impurity with clarity that demands a response. The idea of hardening also reflects the broader cultural context of covenantal relationships. Covenants in the ancient Near East involved blessings for obedience and consequences for disobedience. These consequences were understood as natural outcomes of the relationship. If a vassal violated the terms of a treaty, negative repercussions followed. Israel's covenant relationship with the divine carried similar expectations. Isaiah's messages reveal that the consequences facing the nation stemmed from this relational dynamic. Their failure to uphold justice, practice righteousness, and remain faithful to the covenant brought them into conflict with the holiness revealed in the vision. The political events unfolding around Judah during Isaiah's ministry further illuminate the meaning of hardening. The nation stood between powerful empires, caught in the cross-currents of alliances and wars. Leaders faced difficult decisions that carried significant implications for national identity and survival. Some placed their trust in foreign powers, believing that military alliances offered the best hope for stability. Isaiah, however, warned that such reliance betrayed the covenant. Trust in external powers would lead the nation away from its identity as a people under divine sovereignty. Hardening, therefore, also manifested in political decisions that reflected misplaced loyalties. The reigns of Ahaz and Hezekiah illustrate this tension. Ahaz, faced with immediate military threats, chose to appeal to Assyria for support. Isaiah opposed this decision, urging reliance on the divine instead. Ahaz's choice revealed a heart inclined toward political expediency rather than covenantal trust. Hezekiah, on the other hand, displayed moments of faithfulness, resisting Assyrian demands and seeking guidance from the divine. Yet, even he was not immune to the temptation of forming alliances with foreign powers. Isaiah's messages to Hezekiah highlight the ongoing struggle to maintain loyalty in the face of overwhelming political pressure. The Assyrian campaigns during Isaiah's lifetime brought these issues into sharp focus. Assyrian armies swept through the region, conquering cities, deporting populations, and imposing tributes. Their military success was accompanied by ideological claims that portrayed their rulers as chosen by the gods to bring order to the world. To many, Assyria seemed unstoppable. Isaiah's vision, however, provided a counter-narrative. The divine throne he witnessed stood above all earthly powers. Though Assyria appeared invincible, its authority was limited and ultimately subject to the sovereignty of the one seated on the throne. This perspective becomes especially significant in the account of the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem. While the historical details vary across accounts, the core message remains consistent. Judah faced destruction, yet divine intervention preserved the city. Isaiah interpreted this event as a demonstration of divine sovereignty. The throne room vision revealed a power far greater than the armies besieging the city. While Assyria boasted of its conquests, Isaiah proclaimed that its authority was temporary and subordinate to the divine will. This event reinforced the message that trust in the covenant, not alliances or military might, offered true security. The theme of trust emerges as a central component of Isaiah's message. Trust in the divine becomes the antidote to hardening. Where the heart resists holiness, trust opens the door to transformation. Isaiah's vision demonstrates that holiness is not merely a standard to be met, but a presence that invites relationship. The purification he received serves as a model for the people, showing that trust enables them to engage with holiness without fear. This theme carries significant implications for understanding the nature of faith in ancient Israel. Faith was not an abstract belief, but a commitment to covenantal loyalty reflected in ethical behavior and political decisions. The interplay between trust and holiness also shapes Isaiah's understanding of hope. Hope, in this context, is not a vague optimism, but a conviction that the divine remains faithful to the covenant despite human failure. The remnant represents the embodiment of this hope. Though judgment would come, the divine purpose would endure. The holy seed, preserved through hardship, symbolizes continuity amid disruption. This assurance offered comfort to those who witnessed the turmoil of their time. Even as empires rose and fell, the covenant remained rooted in a sovereignty that transcended political events. Isaiah's messages often blend warnings with expressions of hope, reflecting the dual themes of judgment and restoration. The people are confronted with the consequences of their actions, yet they are also reminded of the possibility of renewal. This interplay reflects the dynamic nature of the covenant, which combines unwavering holiness with steadfast compassion. The vision of the throne room embodies both aspects. The holiness that filled the temple confronted Isaiah's impurity, yet the burning coal offered purification. Similarly, the nation would face judgment for its failures, yet the divine remained committed to its restoration. This dual theme would become especially important for later generations who experienced the trauma of exile. While Isaiah's ministry occurred before the fall of Jerusalem, his messages laid the groundwork for understanding the exile as both judgment and hope. The concept of the remnant offered assurance that the covenant would survive even in the face of national destruction. Later writings attributed to Isaiah expand on these themes, exploring the depths of divine compassion and the promise of renewal. The vision of the throne room thus becomes a foundational element for interpreting the broader narrative of Israel's history. The influence of Isaiah's vision extends beyond ancient Israel, shaping later theological developments. Jewish traditions reflect on the holiness revealed in the vision, exploring its implications for worship, ethics, and community life. Early Christian writings draw from its imagery to describe encounters with the divine and the nature of divine authority. The seraphim, the proclamation of holiness, and the exalted throne all become rich symbols in religious thought. Yet the enduring impact of the vision arises from its profound insight into the relationship between holiness and humanity. It reveals a divine presence that confronts impurity, yet offers transformation, that judges yet restores, that maintains sovereignty while inviting trust. Isaiah's vision thus provides a comprehensive framework for understanding his ministry and the world he inhabited. It illuminates the tensions between faith and fear, trust and political expediency, righteousness and corruption. It shows how divine holiness intersects with human history, shaping the destinies of individuals and nations. The ancient world becomes tangible through this lens, revealing a landscape where divine sovereignty guides events and invites human response. The vision Isaiah experienced, rich in imagery and theological depth, became the foundation for understanding how divine presence engages with human history. Yet its significance extends far beyond the moment of calling. It shaped the framework through which Isaiah interpreted the unfolding events of his nation's life. And it offered insight into how holiness interacts with human imperfection, political turmoil, and the enduring promise of restoration. As Isaiah's ministry progressed, the themes introduced in the vision, divine sovereignty, ethical responsibility, judgment, and hope, continued to resonate, providing clarity and direction for a people navigating the uncertainties of their time. To understand the full impact of Isaiah's vision, one must consider how holiness influenced Israel's understanding of leadership. Kings in ancient Israel were expected to uphold justice, protect the vulnerable, and maintain covenantal faithfulness. Their authority was not absolute, but derived from their responsibility to reflect the divine character. Isaiah's encounter with the divine throne underscored this expectation. The throne he saw was not one among many. It was the definitive symbol of sovereignty. Earthly rulers, regardless of their power, stood beneath this ultimate authority. This perspective allowed Isaiah to critique kings when they strayed from their responsibilities, and to encourage them when they aligned with covenantal principles. The reign of Hezekiah provides a clear example of how Isaiah's vision shaped his counsel. Hezekiah inherited a kingdom weakened by years of political compromise and religious inconsistency. The threat of Assyrian domination loomed large, and the nation faced decisions that would determine its future. Isaiah encouraged the king to trust in the divine, rather than in alliances with foreign powers. This advice was not rooted in political naivety, but in theological conviction. The throne Isaiah saw stood above Assyria's power, offering a source of stability that no earthly alliance could match. Hezekiah's moments of trust demonstrated the potential for leadership grounded in humility and dependence on divine guidance. However, Hezekiah's reign also illustrates the limitations of human leadership. Despite periods of faithfulness, the king struggled with the temptation to secure his position through political maneuvering. His interactions with envoys from distant lands reveal this inclination. Isaiah warned that such engagements could lead to misplaced trust and future vulnerability. The prophet's counsel in these moments reflects the enduring message of the throne room vision. Reliance on human strength undermines covenantal identity. The divine throne remains the ultimate source of security, and trust in its authority is essential for navigating political unpredictability. The concept of trust becomes even more significant when exploring Isaiah's critique of idolatry. In ancient Israel, idolatry was not merely the worship of foreign gods, but a deeper expression of misplaced reliance. Turning to idols symbolized trust in powers other than the divine, whether political alliances, economic security, or social status. Isaiah's vision confronted this tendency by presenting a reality in which only the divine throne holds true authority. The seraphim, the trembling thresholds, and the overwhelming holiness all emphasize the uniqueness of the divine presence. Idols, in contrast, represented human attempts to control or manipulate the forces of life. Isaiah's messages condemned such practices as violations of the covenant and distortions of true worship. Idolatry also carried social implications. It often accompanied practices that exploited the vulnerable or undermined community stability. Isaiah observed that when people turned away from the divine, they also abandoned ethical responsibilities. This pattern appears throughout his messages, where idolatry and injustice are closely linked. The holiness revealed in the vision demanded ethical conduct that reflected divine character. Worship devoid of justice was unacceptable, and Isaiah consistently reminded the nation that true reverence requires righteousness in daily life. His critiques of idolatry, therefore, served both theological and ethical purposes. The interplay between holiness and justice becomes especially clear when examining Isaiah's treatment of social issues. The prophet denounced corruption, exploitation, and neglect of the vulnerable. He emphasized that leaders bore responsibility for ensuring fairness, protecting the marginalized, and maintaining the integrity of the legal system. These concerns were rooted in the covenant, which established justice as a central component of communal life. Isaiah's vision reinforced this expectation by revealing a holiness that permeated every aspect of reality. Justice was not optional. It was a reflection of the divine character. Isaiah's emphasis on justice also challenged the complacency of those who relied on ritual performance as a substitute for ethical behavior. The people continued to observe festivals, offer sacrifices, and participate in temple worship. Yet these actions became hollow when divorced from righteous living. Isaiah argued that the divine rejected worship devoid of ethical integrity. The vision of the throne room revealed a standard of holiness that exposed the inadequacy of ritual alone. True worship required alignment with divine values, expressed through compassion, honesty, and fairness. This message resonated deeply with the covenantal framework, which demanded both ritual fidelity and moral responsibility. The concept of the remnant further illuminates the relationship between holiness and hope. Isaiah recognized that not all would respond to the call for repentance. Yet, he also understood that divine faithfulness ensured the preservation of a core group who remained committed to the covenant. This remnant represented the continuity of the divine purpose. It embodied the resilience of the covenant relationship, even in the face of widespread failure. The image of the holy seed, preserved like a stump after a tree has been cut down, conveys this idea with symbolic depth. It suggests that judgment, though severe, is not the final word. Renewal remains possible for those who remain faithful. This theme becomes even more significant when considering the historical events that unfolded during and after Isaiah's ministry. The Assyrian threat, the siege of Jerusalem, and the eventual exile of Judah all tested the nation's understanding of the covenant. In the face of these hardships, the concept of the remnant offered reassurance that the divine had not abandoned the people. The throne room vision provided the theological foundation for this hope. The holiness that confronted impurity also offered a path to restoration. The sovereignty revealed in the vision ensured that history did not unfold arbitrarily, but according to a purpose that transcended human failure. Isaiah's interpretation of history reflects this understanding. He saw events not merely as political developments, but as expressions of divine purpose. Empires rose and fell, armies marched, and nations made decisions that shaped their destinies. Yet Isaiah perceived these actions within the broader framework of divine sovereignty. His vision of the throne revealed a reality in which the divine governs the course of history, guiding events toward the fulfillment of the covenant. This perspective allowed Isaiah to speak with confidence during times of uncertainty. He recognized that even in moments of judgment, the divine remained faithful to the promise of restoration. The ethical implications of this perspective are profound. If the divine governs history, then individuals and communities bear responsibility for aligning their actions with divine standards. Isaiah's messages consistently emphasize this responsibility. He urged the people to practice justice, show compassion, and uphold integrity. He warned that failure to do so would bring consequences, not because the divine sought punishment, but because holiness demands accountability. Yet he also offered hope for those who remained faithful, affirming that the divine purpose would ultimately prevail. Isaiah's understanding of restoration emerges from this interplay between judgment and hope. He envisioned a future in which the divine presence would once again dwell among the people, renewing their identity and restoring their relationship. This hope did not ignore the reality of hardship, but acknowledged that transformation often arises through difficulty. The throne room vision revealed a holiness that confronts impurity, yet it also revealed a path toward renewal. The purification Isaiah experienced symbolized the possibility of transformation for the entire nation. This theme would resonate deeply with later generations, particularly those who experienced exile and sought to understand their suffering within the framework of the covenant. The enduring significance of Isaiah's vision is evident in its influence on later religious traditions. Jewish writings reflect on the holiness revealed in the vision, exploring its implications for worship, ethics, and communal identity. Early Christian texts draw on its imagery to describe encounters with the divine and to articulate the nature of divine authority. The seraphim, the proclamation of holiness, and the exalted throne become enduring symbols in religious thought. Yet the vision remains deeply rooted in Isaiah's historical context. It addresses the concerns of his time while revealing truths that continue to inspire and challenge. Through the lens of this vision, the world of ancient Judah becomes illuminated. The political tensions, ethical failures, and religious complexities of the time all intersect with the themes of holiness and sovereignty. Isaiah's ministry emerges as a response to these challenges, grounded in a revelation that transcended the circumstances of his life. The throne room he witnessed provided a stable reference point in an unstable world, guiding his interpretations of events and shaping his messages to the people. The vision of the throne room thus represents more than a moment of personal calling. It reveals the structure of reality as Isaiah's world understood it, a universe governed by holiness, shaped by covenant, and guided by divine purpose. It calls individuals and nations to align themselves with this reality, offering both warning and hope. Through Isaiah's encounter, the ancient world becomes vivid with meaning, showing how holiness informs history, shapes identity, and invites transformation. Isaiah's throne room encounter stands as one of the most striking and influential moments recorded in ancient scripture. Yet, its deepest significance is found not only in the overwhelming holiness he witnessed, but in the transformation of his understanding of the world, the covenant, and the divine purpose woven into the fabric of history. By the time his ministry reached its later stages, the themes introduced in that sacred moment had expanded into a comprehensive vision that shaped how generations understood divine sovereignty, human responsibility, and the enduring hope for renewal. This final exploration draws together these strands to reveal the heart of Isaiah's message and the lasting impact of the throne room vision on ancient Israel and beyond. Throughout Isaiah's ministry, holiness remained the central theme, shaping both his interpretation of events and his call to the people. Holiness, as revealed in the vision, was not merely the absence of impurity, but the presence of an active, sustaining force that governed creation. It defined the moral order, revealed the true condition of the human heart, and demanded a response from those who encountered it. Isaiah understood that holiness does not change. Rather, it calls humanity to transformation. This conviction influenced his critique of the nation's ethical failures, his warnings about judgment, and his unwavering belief in the possibility of restoration. The purity bestowed upon him by the burning coal became a symbol of the transformative power that could renew the entire community if it responded in humility. The people of Judah lived in a world where political powers seemed to dominate the course of history. Empires rose with overwhelming force, imposing their will upon smaller nations through military strength and ideological claims. Assyria, the dominant power in Isaiah's time, portrayed its kings as agents of divine authority, tasked with bringing order to the world. Their inscriptions described conquests in language that emphasized both their might and their perceived legitimacy. Against this backdrop, Isaiah's vision provided a radically different perspective. The throne he saw was not one power among many, but the ultimate source of authority that transcended all human claims. This understanding allowed him to interpret political events within a theological framework, reminding the nation that no empire, however formidable, could escape accountability before the sovereignty of the divine. This conviction influenced Isaiah's counsel to the kings and leaders of Judah. He urged them to resist the temptation to rely on foreign alliances for security, emphasizing that such alliances reflected a lack of trust in the covenant. His warnings were not merely political, but theological. By placing their trust in human power, the leaders risked severing their relationship with the one who governed history. Isaiah's ministry illustrates the tension between human strategies for survival and the call to covenantal faithfulness. The vision of the throne served as a constant reminder that divine sovereignty outweighed all earthly calculations. As Isaiah's ministry progressed, the tension between holiness and human failure became increasingly pronounced. The people struggled with injustice, idolatry, and ethical neglect. Isaiah confronted these issues with clarity, using the holiness revealed in the vision as the measure by which their conduct should be evaluated. He condemned practices that exploited the vulnerable and undermined communal stability. He warned that ritual observance without ethical integrity was unacceptable. His messages revealed a profound understanding of the covenant as a holistic relationship encompassing both worship and daily life. This emphasis preserved the continuity of Israel's faith, ensuring that worship remained rooted in moral responsibility. Judgment, in Isaiah's understanding, became a necessary response to this failure. Yet, it was never presented as abandonment. The vision of the throne revealed a holiness that confronted impurity, and this confrontation naturally led to consequences. The people's failure to uphold justice and righteousness placed them in opposition to the divine will. Judgment emerged from this tension, serving as a means to restore the covenant relationship. Isaiah's messages consistently reflect this dynamic. He warned of the consequences that would follow persistent disobedience. Yet he also announced the possibility of renewal for those who turned back in humility. The concept of the remnant provides a powerful expression of this renewal. In Isaiah's messages, the remnant represents the continuity of the divine purpose despite human failure. It symbolizes hope amid judgment, resilience amid destruction, and faithfulness amid widespread unfaithfulness. The image of the stump and the holy seed captures this idea with compelling clarity. Even when the tree is cut down, the root remains alive, capable of generating new life. This metaphor reveals Isaiah's understanding of the covenant as deeply rooted in history, capable of surviving the most severe disruptions. The remnant, therefore, becomes a sign of divine faithfulness, demonstrating that the covenant relationship cannot be extinguished by external forces or internal failures. The hope Isaiah articulated extended beyond the immediate circumstances of his time. His messages envisioned a future in which the divine presence would once again dwell among the people, bringing renewal and restoration. This hope was not limited to political stability or the return to a prosperous era. It involved a profound transformation of the community, grounded in justice, righteousness, and devotion to the divine. Isaiah's vision suggested that true restoration would arise from the renewal of the covenant relationship. The holiness he encountered in the throne room would shape the future identity of the nation, guiding its moral and spiritual development. This vision of renewal became especially meaningful for later generations who experienced exile and loss. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple challenged the people's understanding of the covenant and raised questions about the divine presence in their suffering. Yet Isaiah's messages offered a framework for interpreting these events. The throne room vision revealed that divine sovereignty remained intact, even in the face of political upheaval. The concept of the remnant assured the people that the covenant persisted despite judgment. The promise of restoration gave hope that the divine had not abandoned them. These themes would later shape the writings attributed to Isaiah in the period following the exile, exploring the depths of divine compassion and the promise of renewed relationship. The theological depth of Isaiah's vision also influenced how later traditions understood divine transcendence and immanence. The exalted throne emphasized transcendence, revealing a divine authority that surpassed all earthly powers. Yet, the act of purification demonstrated immanence, showing a divine willingness to engage directly with human imperfection. This dual emphasis became a cornerstone of theological reflection, shaping how communities understood the divine presence. Holiness remained central, not as a distant ideal, but as a reality that invited transformation. Isaiah's experience illustrated that holiness confronts impurity, but also provides the means for renewal. The vision also contributed to the development of angelology in later Jewish and early Christian thought. The seraphim, unique in their description, became symbols of heavenly worship, embodying the reverence appropriate to the divine presence. Their proclamation of holiness influenced liturgical traditions, shaping prayers and hymns that emphasized the transcendence of the divine. The image of the divine throne became a central theme in apocalyptic literature, where visions of heavenly realms offered insight into divine justice and the ultimate fulfillment of the covenant. Isaiah's experience thus played a formative role in shaping religious imagination across centuries. Yet, despite its profound theological impact, Isaiah's vision remains rooted in the concrete realities of his time. The ancient world becomes intelligible through this encounter. The political pressures, ethical challenges, and religious expectations of Judah all intersect with the themes introduced in the vision. Isaiah's ministry emerges as a response to these circumstances, grounded in a revelation that provided clarity in a period of uncertainty. The throne room he witnessed offered a stable reference point in a world of shifting alliances and growing empires. The holiness he encountered provided the standard for evaluating the nation's conduct. The purification he received demonstrated the possibility of transformation. These themes shaped his messages and guided his interactions with kings, leaders, and the people. Isaiah's legacy endures because his vision transcends the boundaries of his historical moment while remaining deeply connected to it. It reveals a world in which divine holiness shapes human existence, where covenantal faithfulness determines the course of history, and where hope persists even amid judgment. The throne room encounter becomes a window into the ancient understanding of reality, offering insight into how the divine engages with the world. It presents a vision of sovereignty that outlasts empires, a call to righteousness that challenges human complacency, and a promise of restoration that speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart. In the end, Isaiah's vision reveals a truth that resounds across time. Holiness is not a distant abstraction, but the living presence at the center of creation. It confronts, purifies, transforms, and restores. It holds nations accountable, yet it never abandons the covenant established in ages past. Through Isaiah's experience, the ancient world becomes illuminated with meaning, reminding all who hear his words that the divine remains engaged with history, guiding humanity toward justice, mercy, and renewal. The throne he saw still stands, exalted above every other authority, and the call issued in that sacred moment continues to echo through the generations, inviting all to recognize the holiness that shapes the world and to walk in faithfulness toward the purpose for which they were created.